Sleep is something that just comes and goes. A part of life so ingrained and natural that it's just faded into the background, never noticed, never missed. For those who can't find it, however, it's something almost like a wound, an absence of something inside of you, a hole that gnaws until the discomfort faded into the back of your mind. Whichever extreme you swing to, the point is that sleep, or lack of it, still remains behind our eyes, deep in the mind, always present, but never closely examined. You don't stop your workday to ponder how exactly is it that you breathe, don't you? I'd hope not. You might be crazy or bored, but the fact you're still alive means you breathe. Isn't that creepy, how your body works without your consent like that? That may seem a bit paranoid of me, distrusting something like your own body, but believe me, my own paranoia once went much, much deeper than this. There are things closer to home, deeper, and much more sadistic and powerful. At least when your body fails you or rebels in a slow-moving but terrible fashion, there are signs. A lump under the arm, a bloody splatter on your hand when you sneeze. It's hard to miss something like your heart twisting in your chest. But what happens when the signs are clear to everyone except for you? What if the fact you're broken makes it impossible to see what's wrong with you? When your mind wants to fuck with you, it's infinitely more dangerous than some tumor. I may be getting a bit jumbled here. I apologize. Let me go back a bit. Explain how it used to be before I needed to write my thoughts down to keep them from being twisted. A year ago, I had been diagnosed with a rather severe case of insomnia. I don't just mean I found it hard to get to sleep. I could go days at a time without so much as nodding off. When I do sleep, it was a short affair, and oddly I remember nothing prior to that. Not even during or after the 4 or so hours escape from wakefulness. Well, that's not true. I do remember flashes of images, brief sensation, all tiny pieces that didn't add up to anything when I put together, and were even less telling on their own. It was like a scene in my memory that had been slightly torn away, and the motion had rendered the edges ragged and leaving only the most inconsequential scraps of half-thoughts and the beginnings of feelings. 1 minute I was riding my bike home from the store, the next I was shaving, and it was dark. Me unpacking my groceries, getting settled in bed, and waking up and showering were all missing. I don't have a bad memory, and it's not photogenic, but it's not exactly normal for me to lose hours out of my day. Finally, I saw a doctor, and after a lot of waiting and I have a hard time trying to make myself sound sane, a shrink finally gave me a curious shrug. It seemed I'd stumped him. In his professional opinion, there was nothing wrong with me. Well, nothing that made sense at least. There was no apparent reason for me to randomly black out like this. But he noted cautiously there were signs of something else. Post-traumatic stress syndrome. He repeated himself for both our sakes, and we were equally confused over this. PTSD sounded crazy, right? Nothing had happened to me that kicked my brain into the closet. Right? Maybe something could have happened while I was out. But that doesn't explain how I got these blackouts in the first place. Almost as confusing, I seemed in good health. Apparently I was some kind of mutant who didn't require sleep to stay on my feet. The shrink didn't believe me when I told him that I'd be awake 113 hours. If he hadn't had noticed the surface symptoms of PTSD, I'm not sure he would have even taken me seriously. He assured me that I didn't have any kind of traumatic disorder, and that it must have been something else. Impossible to tell like this. I need to see a specialist to get answers. And so I scheduled in to see someone else. In the meantime, he advised me to keep a diary of my sleeping patterns, and wrote me a prescription for heavy-duty sleeping pills. And that's how it started. Innocently enough, I was relieved that answers were coming. Slowly, but then something strange happened. On my way to the chemist, I was about to cross the threshold when something suddenly kept my feet in place. You know that sensation when you realize that there's a massive drop in front of you and you're about to blindly step into empty air? It was like that. The aisles of the store extended a moment and my mind locked up with a sudden caution. By the time I noticed the employee speaking to me, the prescription had been crushed in my shaking, sweaty hand, and I've gotten staring into the store like I hadn't seen something terrible. I shook the cobwebs from my mind and smiled at the woman, now feeling thoroughly embarrassed. She mercifully brushed the incident aside and walked me to the counter. I can't really describe what I was feeling as I paid for the bottle and pills. Something was telling me to leave, and whatever it was, it waited outside the store for me. I didn't want to look back at the tugging, nagging presence, not after my display in front of this clerk, but I felt like its eyes were on my back, and it was worried. But I turned around and left, and there was nothing there. What was I expecting to see? I laughed and brushed it off. I just needed some sleep, and maybe tonight I'd finally get it. I was being stupid. Taking the bottle from the wax paper bag in the escalator, I read the label and couldn't shake that strange presence. Before I put the bag away in my backpack, I entertained, for the briefest of seconds, that someone was standing behind me, and I swore as I stepped off on the moving platform that they had been just reaching out to place a hand on my shoulder. I took my medication and recorded it in my diary. The first night, nothing happened, and my diary steadily filled with what I'd already been experiencing. A light dinner, take my meds, shower, read in bed for a few hours, and finally give up and play some Skyrim until the sunrise, and started on my homework. Wasting my day away with shopping, bills, maybe see a movie, avoiding a caffeine, and hitting the gym before finally heading home to repeat the process again. The first 8 days of my diary were the same as this, and I started penning down the words day 9, the diary propped in my comic book. I strangely felt relieved. Folding my legs to prop the comic and the diary up, I chewed the end of my pen and tried to pinpoint this feeling. It wasn't the first time a shadow of something had crossed my mind, like I was accidentally picking up someone else's emotions. Once again, nothing came, and as I put the pen back in the page, something scuttled across the edge of my mind, something akin to panic or maybe being startled. The hair on the back of my neck suddenly stood up and I was alert. I heard a sound like an inhalation drowned by a whisper, and I felt my chest clamp down on my lungs. I was laying down. The comic and diary had fallen from my chest, the pen in my fingers, and a thin beam of very weak pink light streamed in front of my curtains. I sat up and I grabbed the alarm clock on the other side of my table. It was 4:41 in the morning, just before sunrise. Peering down at the clock in the near darkness, waiting for my mind to start working again, I tried to remember the last thing I had done, what time I had sat in the bed to write the diary. Rubbing my eyes, I patted about the diary and checked the time I had written it. It had been 2 in the afternoon when I had began, and I had lost consciousness at that time, but there were scribbles underneath the date. It was illegible. It was definitely my handwriting, and I had tried to form letters, but it had kept on packing together too close or spreading out in the scribbles over itself. I must have had a lot on my mind, and I couldn't decide what deserved space on the paper. How long I had been trying to write after I put down the time? A few minutes? An hour? I've been lucid much longer in the past. As I tried to push out of bed, I found my limbs were sluggish, and the world waved unsteadily as I got on my feet. I felt my way blindly into the bathroom and flipped the light switch, leaning on the counter and splashed water on my face. My eyes were blurry and my mouth was dry. As the lights flickered on, the reflection of the mirror were flashed into my vision like the lens flare. My eyes adjusted and the picture faded away, an image of someone in the bathroom door barely remembered, leaving my very tired image slumped over the sink. What the hell had just happened? The next 7 days had gone by much like the first 8, and it seemed my sudden bout of hibernation had been only a fluke. For some reason, I felt grateful for this. My energy slowly returned, and I felt that same phantom presence returned, with a curious mix of half emotions. It was the same caution from the storefront, But just after my sleep, it had been frantic, impotent, like it was frightened and worried, but could do nothing. As the days went by, I still could not sleep. It relaxed slowly and began to hope. I had stopped pretending this presence didn't exist, and I started adding her to my diary. I don't know why, but I saw her as a woman. Maybe it was crazy for me to personify a voice in my head, but she wasn't a voice really. Did that make it less sane? I couldn't tell. She started to grow relieved, and with it, I too felt better. Whatever it was that had her worried, it was passing, and I felt lighter. Now that I had accepted her existence, if only as part of my mind, I tried to remain as detached as I could. Every night, I read over my diary before entering a new page, and I tried to understand why she existed and what part of me she was an outlet for. To me, this was like isolating a sore, understanding what it was and keeping it from spreading while I learned as much as I could. She must have approved of my approach, since whenever I thought like this, she crooned approvingly in my mind, like she was proud of me. On day 7, I started to realize she was guilty for being here, making me question my sanity, and I felt like I owed her my patience. And then it came again. This time, I had been on my computer, watching Animal Cops, when she fell silent. I know that's difficult to imagine since she can't speak, but I immediately felt her absence. Sitting up, I felt her claw back in my mind, as she quickly torn from me. I barely had time to process the screeching metal warning when I saw a shadow moving to my left, and then I was on the floor. 15 hours had passed this time, and it was 2 in the morning. I had spent the entire time on my side, my computer chair toppled, mouse and keyboard shattered. I must have tried to get up and collapse, falling asleep. My limbs were stiff, sore, and weak, and I had not slept well. It seemed tossing and turning on the hard ground. I remember my dream that I had never happened before. It was hazy, distorted, like it had been partially torn out of me and then stuck back in, but I had one clear, vivid memory of standing over myself when I laid on the floor, breathing slowly, just short of seething through my teeth. No, that wasn't me. I was down here on the floor. It didn't make sense, but I could see it. I could remember it, even if it didn't amount to anything coherent. My computer screen was the only light, and my screensaver was a dark one, so only occasional gray light was cast in the looming room. I was disoriented and tried to pull myself up to my feet, having to brace against the couch, not falling over again. Why am I panting? I had just been sleeping. I had no excuse being tired. No, this makes no sense. Something felt wrong. Where was she? That was the strongest thought I had mustered at that time. Where was she? Crazy, I know, but things became clear as I recognized this, and suddenly I thought, no, I knew that I wasn't alone. Looking around, I tried to peer into the darkness and inch my way across the room, bumping a coffee table, and kept my eyes on the empty middle of the room as I patted the walls for the light switch. The first flash of light imprinted my empty lounge room, but the second showed a shape too quick for me to see, and then the light came on. The vision burned into my eyes. I had been in front of the dark glass sliding door that looked out of the pitch black balcony. If someone had been standing there, or even inside, there would be no way to see them. Not when they were black as ink. Wait, black as ink? Why did I think that? Just as this thought filtered across my mind, I felt cold. Heavy weight pressed on me, and I swore I could hear an exhalation of breath just on my neck. It was as if whatever it was I had imagined was confirming my fear, indicating that yes, I had seen it and I was right. It was there, just too dark to see. I flipped on all the lights, switched the TV on, the radio, the kettle, and started the washing machine. I needed noise. There could be no shadow, no silence, and I don't know what compelled me, but at the time, all I could think of was warding off this presence. Whatever he was, I knew now that it was what she was warning me about. It all made sense to me now. I heard the pills against the glass door and curled up in the corner of my kitchen, holding a box of candles and 4 torches, 2 of which weren't working or had near-dead batteries. I had to just grab whatever I could find, including my butcher knife. Back into the corner like this, I could see everything in the room, but it was a little too comfort. I just watched the sliding door, the black upon black, the figures standing beyond the glass, silent and unmoving. After an hour like this, wide-eyed and panted, I began to calm down and then extended my senses. I could not feel him. I know it sounded silly extending my senses like I'm Henry Drennis or something, but you need to understand that at the time, I was not thinking clearly. This fragment of my mind was as real to me as anything, and the looping, scatterdash logic had all been clear at the time. It was only after my heart stopped pounding and I began to ache from the cramped space that I had begun to detach myself again. Surveying my situation much like I had an imaginary woman, clinically, like all of this would happen to a character in the story, or to a friend or a relative that I admire. I pictured my brother, who I had always liked. My brother looked insane, and if he did, so did I. I told myself that these 2 figures did not exist, and I compacted these thoughts into something solid, driving it to the front of my mind like a roadblock, and stood up. I walked over to where I threw the pills, and even with my newfound determination, I looked down from the dark glass. I bent to gather the pills up and returned them to the bottle, and then stood and stared into the dark balcony. I shut the curtains and turned away, effectively telling him to talk to the hand. I busied myself with cleaning, taking my chaotic, messy apartment and returning it to order, imagining it in my mind, and I did feel slightly better. But I had a visit to my neighbor from downstairs at around 7 in the morning. I was pretty embarrassed and I apologized, but I felt a little reluctant after this, and so I didn't go outside anymore. I ate sparingly because I didn't want to have to buy food, and I had stopped calling friends or going to the gym. I had also stopped taking the pills and neglected to write in my diary. For some reason, I dreaded opening it. What I would find, I don't know, but I wasn't ready. Even if it's just another fact of my growing insanity, it was one I simply couldn't shut the curtains on. I threw the diary in my closet. I never questioned why I kept getting fresh ink on my fingertips. After several days of no sleep and not seeing the outside, I finally decided to go to the gym. It was midnight, but I always went late when no one's around, and it felt good to return to semblance of my routine. As I got to my gym bag together, I checked my bike tires and iPod, and I felt like I was reassembling the order I had scattered. 2 hours later, after a silent workout of an empty, automated gym, I had almost forgotten about everything. The burning in my muscles was familiar and comforting at its familiarity. The crackle of the cheap speaker playing late-night radio, the click of the big fan that never turned right, humming of the Gatorade machine, it was all so normal and familiar to me. I had been silly. I would see the doctor tomorrow and life would go back on track. I knew it. Pulling the zipper out of my bag to toss the water bottle in the towel, I froze. The pills were there, resting on my spare clothes. I hadn't packed them. Seeing them sent a sudden wave of bone-deep exhaustion through me, and as the world wavered, I saw it. I saw him. It was just a shape in the corner of my eye, gone when I whipped around to look, but now the shape stood on my other peripheral, just as quick, disappearing when I darted about to see it. He was in here with me. All my prior resolves melted from my mind, and I began to panic as the weariness set in. I backed up from the table, and in my haste, I knocked the bag and chair down, staggering into my bike and almost fell. The only reason I didn't scream when the lights went out was because my throat had closed with my panic. I knew it was there, standing in front of me, and inches from my face, silent and imposing, possessive. It wanted me. It always had. Finally, I went down, toppling over my bike, landing on my front, looking up the dark glass doors of the gym. Off in the car park, shrouded in shadow, was the figure, barely registering a woman's silhouette. She cupped her hands and called to me, and while I couldn't hear her, I knew she was telling me to run. The rest is a blur. I sprinted down the roads, limbs screaming in protest as the strength seeped from them, my vision blurring, ground swimming underneath my feet, causing me to stagger and trip. I was running, frantic to get away, the shadow catching up to me, enveloping me, like the night itself was coming for me. As it closed about me, my strength was bled away. I vaguely recall a blare of a horn and a set of headlights and a sudden burning sensation in my chest, like someone had punched me so hard that my lungs had expelled the air. The world spun around, the road came fast and hard, and I struggled to go on. Figures crowded me, crawling at me, trying to pull me into the darkness, and I was blacked out, fighting to keep my head above the inky blackness. As my last ounce of strength was torn away, all was dark and silent, and I felt him looming over me. It was as if I was wrapped in dozens of thick blankets, chained up until I was weighted down, and dropped into the tank of freezing cold water. It was helplessness, fear, and a screaming, kicking, yet futile desperation to escape, and the whole time he stood over that tank, silent, satisfied. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. I had a fractured ribs, a shattered hip, several broken fingers, and I almost died from a heart attack. They told me that I had run into traffic and been hit by a car, but when people tried to help me, I had swung at them and staggered into yet another car. That one put me in no state to run anymore, and I had just begged them to leave me alone, screaming not to fall asleep. I had been clutching the diary on my chest the entire time, and when they showed the contents to me, I knew I had to get help. There's a certain wisdom in telling when you're too far gone to help yourself. I have yet been able to find the words that I find adequate, but the sanest thing a man can do is admit when he is insane. All I knew was that I couldn't trust my own mind no longer. I went willingly, and a much lighter, to the mental ward. I asked that I keep the diary and keep adding to it, not really expecting to be allowed to, but they agreed. And now, with the burden of my mental health passed onto someone else, I felt lighter, I guess. Like I had a free pass to finally look into the dark glass and see just what it was that lurked there wearing my face. I didn't need to worry about him anymore. That was the doctor's job, right? And what I had seen in the diary that had prompted me to submit to these doctors, each instance of her had been scribbled out with such force the page had ripped in places, rapid crisscrosses that clawed out her account, tearing her away, and in some places, tentative writing had appeared next to the mad scratches, too light and thin to read. And as the pages went on, they became fewer and smaller and fainter, like the hand that wrote them became weaker. Each page was more demented by the scribbles, until finally, a full black page, ripped and bleeding over its next page so that it would smudge, smeared, and torn. On this page, I had drawn 3 figures, all crude, standing in line. I had drawn so hard that they had been partially imprinted into the following page. This continued for a few dozens of pages, each faded copies added to it, elaborated on, until the figure on the left grew, twisted, and deformed, and the other one to the right shrank and weakened, and the middle figure had simply curled up and cowered. I had used my palm and thumb to mash the wet ink, warping the picture so that they would swirl inwards, becoming less and less coherent, just a warped spiral. And on the final page, the spiral became a face, and this face loomed over me as I write this. Whether he is real or not, I cannot escape him, and I don't know if anyone can help me. He watches these words form on the page, and he approves. I'm glad he likes this. Maybe he'll tell me to wake up if I please him. He want me to tell you that I might not, though. He says, you can't help me. The nurse is coming with my pills. Please don't let me sleep long. Please wake me up, doctor.